and social. What if I told you that being a nice person might be the very thing that gets you crushed when life turns against you? That the world doesn't reward harmlessness, it hunts it. And that real virtue begins only when you become dangerous enough to choose restraint. People often confuse being harmless with being good, but that's a dangerous misunderstanding. Harmlessness is not a moral virtue and social. It's simply a lack of capability. If you don't have the strength, the will, or the tools to cause harm and social, then your so-called kindness is not a choice. It's the only option available to you. That's not morality. That's just weakness. And social morality only exists when there is the possibility of immorality. If you are physically frail, mentally timid, and spiritually unprepared for confrontation, you may appear peaceful, but that peace is fragile, conditional, and dependent entirely on the goodwill of others. You haven't earned it, and social, you're merely existing within it because you lack the ability to disrupt it. And social, it's easy for someone without claws to brag about never scratching anyone. That's not a decision. That's a limitation. And social, imagine a person who cannot lift their hand in self-defense, claiming moral high ground because they have never struck anyone. What choice do they have? They cannot strike anyone. And social, that is the same kind of virtue a rabbit has when it doesn't attack predators. Not because it's making an ethical decision, but because it's incapable of doing so in the first place. In human society, this form of harmlessness doesn't keep you safe. It merely leaves you dependent on the protection of those who are stronger than you. And those stronger than you may not always be benevolent. The truly dangerous thing about this misunderstanding is that it produces people who believe they are morally superior simply because they have no power to cause trouble. They become complacent, soft, and overconfident in their goodness. But the world is not filled only with kind, fair, and rational people. And social, there are those who will exploit weakness without hesitation. If your safety depends entirely on the mercy of others and social, then you are not safe. You are vulnerable. And when someone decides to take advantage of you, you will have nothing to fall back on. Your harmlessness will not inspire pity. It will invite predation. And social, a more honest approach is to recognize that goodness must be backed by the ability to be dangerous. The person who is capable of causing great harm, but consciously chooses not to, is infinitely more admirable than the person who refrains from harm simply because they are unable. And social, strength, skill, and the willingness to act are what give your moral decisions weight. Without them, you are not making a choice. You are simply constrained by your own weakness. In that sense, the development of power, whether physical, intellectual, or social, is not in opposition to morality. It is the foundation of it. The capacity for force gives your peace meaning, and social, because it's a peace you have the ability to shatter but decide to maintain, and social. And only when you have the ability to act with real consequence can you claim to be making a truly moral decision. The world is not a gentle place, and it never has been. Beneath the surface of civilization and social, the same predator-prey dynamic that has governed life for millions of years still operates. We may have laws, governments, and social, and polite conversation, but none of these erase the fact that there are people, organizations, and social, and forces in life that will exploit weakness the moment they sense it. And social, innocence and good intentions do not serve as protection against those forces. A predator does not stop to consider whether its prey is morally pure. The wolf doesn't care if the rabbit has never harmed anyone, term, and social. The only calculation it makes is whether it can catch the rabbit and whether the rabbit can fight back. Many people grow up believing that if they are good, polite, and agreeable, life will treat them fairly. And social. This belief collapses the moment they encounter someone who doesn't share those values. If you meet an individual, or worse, and a system that operates purely out of self-interest or cruelty, your harmlessness becomes an advantage to them. They will use it against you. Negotiating with someone who respects only strength is pointless if you have none. You can plead, you can explain, you can try to appeal to their better nature, but if they do not possess a better nature, your words are meaningless. In such situations, the only language they understand is power. This reality is not limited to physical danger and social. It exists in workplaces where bullies manipulate the weak, in relationships where one partner dominates the other through control, and social. In politics where the interests of the powerless are ignored. The pattern is the same. Those with power shape the rules, and social. And those without it must live by them, whether they are fair or not, and social. To pretend that the predator-prey dynamic no longer exists is to blind yourself to how the world truly functions. It learn and social might be more comfortable to believe that everyone is reasonable and social. But that comfort will vanish the first time you encounter someone who isn't. And social. The recognition of this reality should not fill you with bitterness. It should fill you with resolve. You do not need to become a predator to survive in a world where predators exist. But you do need to stop thinking like prey. Social. Strength is not simply the ability to overpower others. It is the ability to ensure that you cannot be overpowered. And social. It is a shield against exploitation. When you cultivate the capacity to resist, to push back, to assert yourself, and social, you alter the equation in the predator's mind. Suddenly, you are no longer an easy target. Your strength, whether it is physical, mental, and social, or social, makes the cost of attacking you too high. Those who respect only strength will not give you fairness out of kindness. They will give you fairness because it serves them to do so. And when you develop yourself into someone who is not easily dominated and social, the number of people willing to test you drops dramatically because they recognize, even if they can't explain it, that you are not someone to be trifled with. And social. Aggression is often spoken of as if it is something inherently evil, something to be eradicated entirely from human behavior. This is a misunderstanding of its nature. Aggression, its raw, uncontrolled form, is destructive, but does not mean it is useless. Like fire, it can burn and destroy, but when harnessed and directed, it becomes a source of power, light, and protection. And social. The problem is not that aggression exists within you. It is that most people have never learned to discipline it. And social. To transform it from chaotic energy into a controlled instrument. When you understand this, you begin to see aggression not as something to be suppressed, but as a tool to be shaped. In its most basic sense, aggression is simply the capacity to move forward with force and intent. It is the refusal to be passive in the face of resistance. And social. Without some form of aggression, you cannot assert boundaries, defend what is valuable, and social, or make meaningful changes in a world that will push back against you at every turn. And social. The person who cannot be assertive will be trampled by those who can. And social. The one who has no capacity for confrontation will watch their values erode because they were too timid to protect them. To cultivate aggression as a tool, you must first learn to recognize it within yourself without shame. It is a part of human nature, an evolutionary inheritance that allowed your ancestors to survive. You carry the same wiring in your nervous system, the same physiological responses, increased heart rate, sharpened focus, surges of energy, that prepare you for decisive action. Pretending this part of you doesn't exist only ensures that it will emerge uncontrolled in moments of crisis, or worse, and social, that it will wither entirely and leave you defenseless. The goal is not to live without aggression and social, but to master it so it serves you rather than the other way around. Controlled aggression is the sharpened edge of the sword you carry at your side. You do not swing it recklessly at every challenge, but when the moment comes where you must act decisively, it is there, ready. This is why training, whether physical through martial arts and social, mental through debate and critical thinking, or emotional through self-control, is so important. And social training channels aggression into competence. It teaches you how to apply just enough force to accomplish your goal without unnecessary destruction. And social, a dangerous person who cannot control themselves is a threat to everyone, including themselves. But a dangerous person who has learned restraint is a stabilizing force. They can step into chaotic situations and bring order. And social, not because they are harmless, but because they are capable of unleashing power if necessary. And social aggression in this form becomes a guardian of what matters most, a resource that you carry with you silently until the day it is needed. The absence of such a capacity is not peace. It is helplessness masquerading as virtue. True moral strength is only possible when you have the capacity to do harm and consciously choose not to. If you are incapable of causing damage, your so-called goodness is not the result of moral decision making and social. It is simply the default state of someone without power. Morality has weight only when there is an alternative path you could take, one that is destructive, selfish, or unjust, and you deliberately turn away from it. Without that alternative, your restraint is meaningless because it costs you nothing. Imagine two people. One has no ability to fight, no influence, no resources, no voice. The other is skilled, capable, strong, and social, and feared by those who might wish to cross them. If both avoid harming others, who is truly virtuous? The first does so because they cannot do otherwise. The second does so in spite of the fact that they could easily win any confrontation. And social, it is obvious that the second person's restraint carries far more moral authority because it is a conscious act of discipline, not an unavoidable outcome of weakness. This is why the cultivation of strength is not opposed to morality. It is the foundation of it. When you build physical capacity, sharpen your mind, and strengthen your spirit, you give yourself the potential for significant impact, for better or worse. You become someone who could dominate, exploit, or destroy if you chose to. But when you refrain from those actions, your goodness is no longer theoretical and social. It becomes a choice made in the presence of temptation and opportunity, and that is where real virtue lies. The inability to harm is often mistaken for moral innocence, but it is closer to naivety. And social, if you have never stood at the crossroads where you could use your strength for selfish gain, then you have never truly tested your character. A person who has faced the temptation to abuse their power and has rejected is trustworthy in a way the powerless can never be. And social, they know what it means to hold the sword and keep it sheathed. And social, they understand the weight of their capability and the responsibility it carries. And social, building the capacity for force changes how you relate to the world. And social, you stop avoiding conflict out of fear and start choosing peace because you value it. And social, you no longer need to submit to the will of others simply because you cannot resist. You can resist. And social, but you choose not to unless it is necessary. This changes the way people see you. And social, they recognize that your calmness is not born of weakness, but of control. And social, they respect you because they know that if you were pushed far enough, you could act decisively. And social, and that knowledge shapes their behavior toward you. When you have the strength to inflict harm, but the wisdom to refrain. And social, you embody the highest form of moral discipline. You are not a fragile peacekeeper hoping the world will be kind. And social, you are a capable protector who can meet force with force if the moment demands it, yet chooses the harder, nobler path of restraint. And social, every human being carries within them a side they would rather not acknowledge, a capacity for force, aggression, and even destruction. This is often referred to as the shadow. The part of the psyche that contains impulses society has taught us to suppress. And social, many people try to deny this part of themselves entirely, convincing themselves they are incapable of harm. But this denial does not make it disappear. It simply drives it underground, where it remains unexamined and uncontrolled. The more you reject it, the more likely it is to emerge suddenly in moments of stress, fear, or anger. And social, catching you and everyone around you off guard. Integrating this shadow side does not mean giving in to destructive impulses. And social, it means bringing them into the light where they can be understood, disciplined, and directed. And social, a person who knows they have the capacity for aggression and chooses to use it in the service of something noble is far more stable than the person who claims they have no such capacity at all. And social, when you own your potential for danger, you no longer live in fear of it. And social, you can use it deliberately rather than being overwhelmed by it in moments of crisis. This integration begins with honest self-reflection. And social, you have to admit to yourself that you are not purely gentle or purely harmless. You have the same ancient wiring as your ancestors. The fight response that helped them survive predators, defend their families, and stand their ground. In modern life, these instincts might feel out of place, but they still have value when understood and applied properly. The willingness to confront, to set boundaries, and social, and to defend what is important is rooted in the same primal capacity for force. Once you acknowledge this part of yourself, the next step is discipline. Training, whether in a physical skill like martial arts, a mental skill like debate and social, or an emotional skill like self-regulation, allows you to channel that capacity into competence. And social, discipline transforms raw aggression into a controlled instrument that can be used to protect rather than destroy. And social, you become someone who can step into conflict without losing control. And social, someone whose presence alone discourages threats because others sense your capability. The irony is that people who have integrated their shadow and developed the capacity force often become calmer and more compassionate. Long social, they are less reactive, not more, because they no longer feel powerless. And social, they do not need to prove themselves through reckless displays of strength, and they do not panic when confronted. And social, they know exactly what they can do if the situation demands it, and that knowledge brings a quiet confidence. By integrating your capacity for aggression, you make yourself whole. You are no longer pretending to be something you are not. And social, and you are no longer at the mercy of an unacknowledged part of your own nature. Instead, you stand with both strength and self-control. And social, capable of great force yet guided by the choice to use it with purpose. Aggression is not a modern invention. It is an ancient survival mechanism embedded deep within human nature. For thousands of years, and social, our ancestors lived in environments where danger was not an abstract idea, but a daily reality. Survival often depended on the ability to respond decisively to threats, whether those threats came from wild animals, rival tribes, or natural challenges. The human nervous system evolved to handle these situations with a surge of focus, energy, and social strength. The fight response. That same wiring exists within you today, even if the threats you face are less about physical survival and more about protecting your values, livelihood, or relationships. To deny this evolutionary inheritance is to strip yourself of one of the most powerful tools your species has developed. And social, your capacity for force is not a flaw in your design, It is a feature that allowed your bloodline to continue. Every person alive today descends from generations of individuals who knew when to stand and fight. And social. Those who could not summon aggression when necessary often did not survive long enough to pass on their traits. And social. That is the hard truth of human history, and it is written into your biology. In the modern world, physical survival may not be at stake as often, but the principle is the same. Threats now come in the form of exploitation, injustice, manipulation, and deceit. The battlefield may be the workplace, the legal system, or even the dynamics within your personal relationships, but the need for decisive, forceful action remains. The aggression that once helped your ancestors defend their homes can now help you defend your boundaries, your integrity, and your goals. The challenge is that society often teaches people to suppress this part of themselves entirely, equating any display of force with wrongdoing. As a result, many grow up unprepared for situations where assertiveness or confrontation is necessary. They are like warriors who have laid down their weapons and convinced themselves they will never be attacked. When conflict inevitably arises, they are shocked and powerless, unable to respond effectively. And social. Harnessing this ancestral capacity does not mean becoming violent or domineering. It means reclaiming your natural ability to act with strength and resolve when circumstances demand it. Training your body through discipline and social, strengthening your mind through learning and strategy and social, and developing emotional control are all ways to channel this inherited aggression into productive, protective action. And social, the same energy that once fueled physical battles can fuel the courage to speak the truth, defend the vulnerable, and social, and pursue difficult goals despite resistance. When you remember that this capacity is part of your heritage and social, you stop seeing aggression as something alien or shameful. And social, you recognize it as a tool forged by countless generations of survival and adaptation. And social, by integrating it into your life with discipline and moral clarity, you ensure that you are not just a passive bystander in your own story, but an active participant who can meet challenges with the same unyielding spirit that kept your ancestors alive. One of the paradoxes of developing real strength is that the more capable you are of controlled aggression, the less you will actually need to use it. People can sense competence. They can feel when they are in the presence of someone who is steady and confident and not easily intimidated. This unspoken awareness changes how they interact with you. Most confrontations never escalate with such a person because the underlying message is cleared if pushed. They can and will respond decisively. And social. That potential alone often prevents conflict from arising in the first place. This is why truly dangerous people are often calm and composed. And social. They have no need to prove themselves through unnecessary displays of dominance or hostility. And social. They do not feel the constant urge to show their strength because they know they have it. In fact, and social. Their very demeanor communicates that they are not to be underestimated. The presence of a strong and social, disciplined person tends to bring stability to chaotic situations, not because they are harmless and social, but because they radiate the quiet warning that they could be otherwise. When you lack the ability to defend yourself or your position and social, you may overcompensate with bluster or avoidance. You might try to placate others, withdraw from confrontation and social, or speak louder than necessary to give the illusion of strength. But when you genuinely have the capacity for force and social, you don't need such tactics. You can remain patient, measured, and social, and respectful even in tense situations because you are not operating from fear. And social. The knowledge of what you could do if necessary allows you to choose a peaceful resolution without feeling cornered or powerless. And SOS principle is visible in many areas of life. In personal relationships, and social. Those who carry themselves with quiet strength tend to face less manipulation or disrespect. In professional settings and social, leaders who project competence and self-assuredness often encounter fewer challenges to their authority. Even in casual social interactions and social, people instinctively adjust their behavior in the presence of someone who clearly has control over themselves and their environment. And social, the key is that this control is gene. It comes from real skill, not from pretending to be something you are not. And social, the irony is that those who lack power often end up in more conflicts, not fewer. They attract bullies, manipulators, and opportunists because predators seek easy prey. A person who has trained themselves to be strong, disciplined, and social, and capable is simply not worth the effort to challenge. Just as in nature, long-term, predators think twice before engaging with something that might fight back effectively. And social, this natural deterrent effect means that your preparedness for conflict reduces the likelihood you will face it. And social, strength combined with discipline creates an invisible boundary around you. People respect it, even if they don't consciously understand why. And social, they sense that crossing that line would have consequences, and so they rarely do. In this way, and social, the cultivation of controlled aggression becomes a paradoxical path to peace. And social, where your readiness to act decisively ensures you are seldom forced to act at all to develop real strength. You must train yourself across every dimension, physical, mental, and moral. Each one supports the others, and neglecting any of them leaves a weakness that can be exploited. Physical training builds the body into a reliable foundation for action. When turn you are strong, agile, and enduring, you not only increase your ability to protect yourself and others, but also gain a deep sense of confidence that comes from knowing your body will not fail you when it matters. And social, this doesn't require becoming a professional athlete. It means deliberately cultivating physical capability so you can stand your ground, endure stress, and meet challenges without collapsing under pressure. Mental training is equally vital. And social, the body without the mind is like a weapon without aim. You must sharpen your ability to think clearly under stress, to analyze situations quickly, and to see through deception. Life will test you with problems that cannot be solved by force alone. And social, and if you lack the mental agility to adapt, you will lose ground even if you are physically strong. This mental discipline comes from reading and social, learning, debating, solving problems, and deliberately exposing yourself to challenges that stretch your thinking. And social, the more complex and uncertain the situation, the more you will rely on the clarity of thought you have developed through practice. Moral training binds it all together. Strength and intelligence without moral direction become dangerous in the wrong hands. And social, moral strength means knowing what you stand for, what you will protect, and what you will refuse to compromise on. And social, it means having principles that are not easily bent by fear, temptation, or pressure. And social, this kind of grounding prevents you from becoming a tool of destruction. And social, because you understand that your capabilities are meant to serve something greater than yourself. And social, moral training is developed through reflection by studying the consequences of actions, both your own and those of others, and by holding yourself accountable to a standard higher than convenience. When all three areas are developed together, you become balanced. Physical strength gives you the power to act. Mental sharpness tells you when and how to act. Moral clarity ensures you act for the right reasons. Without physical training and social, your intentions remain just words. Without mental training, your strength is directionless. Without moral training and social, your intelligence and strength can be twisted into tools for harm. The world does not reward those who are partially prepared. And social, it tests the whole person. A crisis may demand you think strategically under pressure, defend yourself physically and social, and stand firm in your principles all at once. If you have trained each part of yourself deliberately and social, such a moment will not catch you off guard. And social, you will not need to scramble for courage or clarity because you will have built them long before they were required. In that moment, and social, your readiness will be the difference between being swept away by events and standing unshaken in the face of them. And social, life is not a question of whether challenges will come, but when and in what form. The wolves, whether they are people, circumstances, or systems, will arrive sooner or later. They may appear as blatant aggression, subtle manipulation, unfair treatment, or sudden crises that threaten your stability. Hoping that they will not come is wishful thinking. Preparing for their arrival is realism. If you accept that adversity is inevitable and social, you can begin to shape yourself into someone who can meet it head on instead of being crushed by it. Preparation means building yourself into a person who cannot be easily overwhelmed. When you develop strength, skill, and resilience and social, you shift from a position of dependency to one of autonomy. And social, you are no longer at the mercy of luck or the goodwill of others because you carry within yourself the capacity to deal with hardship directly. And this readiness changes the way you approach life. And social, you stop fearing the possibility of conflict or loss because you know you have the ability to respond. And social, the unknown is less intimidating when you trust your own competence. Meeting life's wolves requires more than physical force. And social, it demands emotional endurance so that you do not crumble under pressure. It requires mental sharpness so that you can recognize threats before they fully form and see through deception. And social, it calls for moral certainty so that when you act, you are not lost in hesitation or doubt whether you are doing the right thing. And social, this combination of preparation ensures that when you face a challenge, you are able to respond with speed, clarity, and conviction. The unprepared person, when confronted by a wolf, reacts in panic. They freeze, they plead, and social, or they retreat in the hope that the danger will pass if they simply avoid it. Often, this only emboldens the threat. Wolves, literal or metaphorical, can sense fear and weakness. They are encouraged when they meet no resistance. And social, but when they encounter someone who stands their ground with quiet confidence, they hesitate. They know that this will not be an easy victory, and that hesitation can be enough to turn the tide in your favor. Preparedness also changes how others perceive you long before conflict even begins. A strong and disciplined person sends an unspoken messaging, and social, I am not the one to target. This presence alone can prevent many challenges from ever materializing. And social, because the wolves are always looking for the easier path. In this way, readiness is both a defense and a deterrent. To meet life's wolves head-on is not to go looking for a fight, but to refuse to be helpless when one comes to you. And social, it is to train yourself so thoroughly, in body, mind, and character, that no matter the form adversity takes. And social, you are capable of standing firm. This is not arrogance, it is the quiet assurance that when the moment comes, you will not be prey. The goal is not to remove all danger from yourself, but to shape it into something disciplined and purposeful. And social, harmlessness is not a virtue, and recklessness is not strength. The ideal is to become dangerous in a way that is entirely under your control, and social, so that your capacity for force is guided by principle rather than impulse. And so is where the concept of dangerous discipline comes into play. The ability to act with overwhelming power, if necessary, while choosing restraint as your default. A person with dangerous discipline does not move through life seeking conflict and social, but neither do they avoid it out of fear. They carry themselves with quiet confidence, knowing they have the means to protect what matters. And social. This confidence is not loud or arrogant. It is steady, the kind that others can sense without being told. It comes from countless hours of training, from deliberate preparation, and from the refusal to leave one's capabilities to chance. To aspire to dangerous discipline, you must accept that power without control is destructive, and control without power is fragile and social. Many people err on one side or the other. Some become physically strong, but lack the patience, judgment, and social or moral grounding to use that strength wisely. Others cultivate kindness and self-control, but have no real ability to enforce their boundaries when they are tested. In either case, the balance is incomplete. Dangerous discipline demands both, and social, the raw capacity to act with force and the wisdom to know when that force should be held back. And social, this balance also transforms your relationships with others. People respect someone who is capable but measured. And social, they know that your calmness is not the result of weakness, but the result of choice. They also know that if circumstances were to demand it, and social, you could respond with decisive action. That respect acts as a form of protection, discouraging attempts to manipulate or overpower you. And social. In this way, dangerous discipline becomes not only a personal asset, but a social one. Developing this state requires continuous refinement. It is not enough to train your body once or to sharpen your mind for a short period. Both must be maintained. Discipline is a daily practice, reinforced by the choices you make and the habits you keep. You test your control in small ways so that when faced with larger challenges, your composure holds. You train your strength so that it is reliable, not situational, and social. And you ground your actions in principles so that your power serves a purpose beyond self-interest. The true measure of dangerous discipline is not how often you use your strength, but how effectively your presence alone can prevent situations from escalating. And social, it is the ability to walk through life without fear, not because there is no danger. And social, but because you have become the kind of person who can meet danger with equal or greater force and yet chooses, more often than not, and social, to keep that force in reserve. Strength without control is chaos, and control without strength is weakness. And social, become someone capable of great force, yet disciplined enough to use it only when necessary. And social, and you will carry quiet power that commands respect and keeps you unshaken when the world tests you.